The vow of calloused hands. The wind rolled across the plains like a restless ocean, brushing the long grass into waves of gold. Dust curled up from the wagon wheels as Eliza tightened her shawl around her shoulders, her boots worn thin from too many miles. She had walked most of the way here, though her uncle's mule had pulled the wagon. Now, at the edge of a sprawling ranch, she stood staring at weathered fences, a wide porch, and the shadow of a man who seemed carved from the very land he worked. The widowed rancher, Caleb Ward, was known across counties as the man who buried his wife too young, raised 2 boys near to manhood, and never spoke more words than he had to. His hat brim shaded his eyes, but even from a distance Eliza could feel the weight of his silence. She swallowed her fear. She had come with little more than threadbare clothes, a cast-iron skillet, and a will forged out of hardship. Her parents had been lost to fever, her kin scattered. Work was all she knew, and survival was all she had left. "I'll work till my hands bleed," she promised, her voice steady though her knees trembled. "I'll mend fences, cook meals, haul water, whatever it takes. Just give me a place to stay, Mr. Ward." Caleb studied her for a long while, his arms crossed. Behind him, the ranch stretched endless, dotted with cattle grazing under a sun that seemed never to rest. His boys, lanky and restless, stood near the barn, curious at the stranger. At last he spoke, his voice gravelly with disuse. "Work is one thing, Mississippi. But work don't raise boys. Work don't soften grief. Work don't sit at the table and make a house a home." She flinched, biting her lip. She had expected him to question her strength, not her heart. He stepped down from the porch, his boots sinking into the dust, and for the first time she saw the weariness in his eyes. A man broken, yet still standing. "Can you be a wife?" he asked quietly. The question stole her breath. She hadn't dreamed of such, only of earning her keep. But the way he asked it wasn't of passion or desire. It was of need, of survival, of children who had lived too long without a mother's touch. Her throat tightened. Could she? She, who had no children of her own, who had never known a man's bed, who feared failure more than hunger. She faltered, staring at her scarred hands. "I can try." That night, she sat in the small spare room Caleb gave her, staring at the moonlight that slipped between the curtains. She heard the boys' laughter in the distance, the creak of barn wood in the wind. Her chest ached with a strange longing she hadn't expected. Not just for safety, but for belonging. Days turned to weeks. Eliza proved her vow with sweat and blood. Her palms blistered from scrubbing, from pulling weeds, from sewing torn shirts by lamplight. The boys tested her with sharp tongues and sly tricks, yet she answered with patience she didn't know she possessed. Slowly, the house began to change. Windows gleamed, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread, and Caleb found supper waiting after long hours on the range. The laughter of children softened, grew warmer, no longer edged with loss. But in the quiet of night, Eliza wondered if labor alone was enough. For Caleb's eyes still carried shadows, and his question lingered like a brand upon her heart. "Can you be a wife?" And though she had promised to work until her fingers broke, she began to realize the harder task might be learning how to love. Chapter 2. The Question of Love. Autumn swept over the plains, painting the horizon with copper skies. The cattle drives slowed, leaving Caleb more time at the homestead. With more time came silence, long, heavy silences at the supper table, broken only by the clatter of forks and the boys' chatter. Eliza kept her eyes lowered most nights, afraid to meet his gaze. She had kept her vow, her hands were roughened, her back sore, yet she had given all she could. Still, the unspoken question haunted her. One evening, after the boys had gone to bed, Caleb lingered on the porch. Eliza hesitated before joining him, clutching her shawl against the chill. Stars wheeled bright above them, endless and cold. "You've done good by this place," Caleb said at last. His tone was low, almost reluctant, as though the words cost him. House feels different. Boys look to you, though they won't admit it. Her heart leapt, though his face remained grave. Thank you, Mr. Ward. Caleb, he corrected softly. She nodded, her breath catching. Silence stretched between them again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was searching. He turned, his gaze steady upon her. I asked you once if you could be a wife. Maybe I should have asked if you could love a man who's been broken in half. A man who don't know how to smile much anymore. A man still carrying a grave inside him. Eliza's throat tightened, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. Love isn't always about smiles, Caleb. It's about standing beside someone when they can't stand on their own. It's about giving what little you have, and trusting it's enough. He studied her, the flicker of lantern light catching the lines of weariness on his face. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, almost as if against his will, he reached for her hand. His rough palm enveloped hers, and she felt the tremor in his touch. Eliza, he whispered, her name tasting unfamiliar on his tongue. You've already been more than work, more than help. You've been hope. Maybe that's what a wife is meant to be. Her breath broke into a soft sob as she leaned into him. For the first time since she had come to the ranch, she didn't feel like a servant or a stranger. She felt seen, needed, not for her labor, but for her heart. The days that followed were different. Caleb's boys began calling her Ma without thinking, their voices hesitant at first, then certain. Caleb, though slow to show it, began to soften. He lingered longer at the table, his laughter rare but real when it came. One evening, as winter whispered at the edges of the land, Caleb stood in the doorway of the kitchen while Eliza kneaded bread. Flour dusted her hair, her hands deep in dough. He watched her, quiet as always, until she finally looked up, flushed and smiling. I'll toil till my fingers break, she teased, repeating her old vow. Caleb stepped forward, brushing the flour from her cheek with surprising tenderness. Not any more, he said. From now on, we bear the work together. Husband and wife. And in that simple moment, Eliza realized her vow had transformed. It was no longer just about bleeding hands or weary labor. It was about building a life, a family, and a love that even grief could not erase.